So this video is about fascia. Starting Before starting fascia, let us understand what do you have when you see a person. When you see a person, what do you see? You see first of all the skin. Okay. Beneath the skin, we have some layer present. Okay, we may not feel it as such. We feel muscle. We can feel bones. We can feel muscle. But this layer we cannot feel. This layer, which is like an butter paper between our structures, okay, is nothing but the fascia. Now, why do you have this paper? So that the clothes do not have friction between them, right? Similarly, our body is made up of so many complex structures, just one beside the other. Okay, and we aim that, our body aims that there should not be friction amongst these whole structures. There should not be friction amongst the nerve and the vessel and the muscle. So to protect the friction between these, we have this connective tissue present, that is nothing but the fascia. Now this concept of fascia was been given in the year 1930 when the great scientists Grodinsky and Holoyuko established the modern understanding of these layers. What they did was they injected gelatin into the muscle structure, and they found out that the path is not only resisted by the muscle structures and the vessels but by something else. So, what was this something else is nothing but the fascia or the connective tissue that is separating these structures. So, when you talk about fascia, we should always tell it like it is the areolar connective tissue that separates the structures so that there is no friction amongst them. Now, when we talk about fascia of head and neck, there are two types of main fascia. We have something called as superficial cervical fascia, and we have something called as deep cervical fascia. Now this deep cervical fascia is again divided into the anterior layer, the middle layer, and the posterior layer. The anterior layer, we have investing fascia over the neck, the paratomesenteric fascia, and the temporal fascia. With the middle layer, we have sternohyoid omohyoid division, sternothyroid thyrohyoid division, and visceral, which include buccopharyngeal, pretracheal, retropharyngeal. While the posterior layer, we have alar division, prevertebral division. Now, talking about this superficial fascia, it is basically a layer of dense connective tissue that courses deep to the subcutaneous tissue throughout the entire body. Now, what happens is, how do you understand the superficial fascia? Now, see, what do you see in a human when you see the body parts? You see the most important structure, that is skin overlay. Once you remove the skin, you have subcutaneous tissue underlying. Once you remove the subcutaneous tissues, we have this superficial fascia underlying. Now, below the mouth, usually in the head and neck, below the mouth, the muscles of facial expressions lie deep to the superficial fascia. Whereas in the upper face, the muscles of facial expressions are superficial to this fascia. In this figure that is there, this is the cross section of your neck, showing this yellow part that is present is superficial fascia, while the platysma, the superficial fascia, as you can see in the figure, is lying over the platysma muscle. Now this whole yellow part, or this whole yellow part is the superficial fascia. In summary, basically superficial fascia is the layer of connective tissue present beneath the subcutaneous tissue. So skin, you have skin, you have connective tissue, and then you have this superficial fascia. When we talk about deep cervical fascia, Let us take a look over this diagram. This is nothing but a cross section of vertebrae or cross section of whole neck actually. Okay, let me explain you the whole diagram. Okay, now supposing this structure here present is the vertebra. Okay, and this is the anterior part of the neck. This is the posterior part of the neck. Let us start with the posterior part. Now, as we all know, the muscle of back, this is the trapezius muscle, that is. Okay, then we have some deep cervical muscles present, which are not very much important now to be explained. This is levator scapulae present. This is middle and posterior scalene muscles. This is the anterior scalene muscle present. This is cervical sympathetic trunk. This is the carotid sheath that is present. Here we have recurrent laryngeal nerve. Then we have this U-shaped structure that is thyroid gland. We have sternomastoid muscle. We have sternohyoid muscle. We have platysma muscle. We have sternothyroid muscle. We have omohyoid muscle. We have trachea present. We have esophagus here. The phrenic nerve lying just anterior to scalene anterior muscle. Vertebra present and the sympathetic trunk. Now, when we talk about deep cervical fascia, it is divided into anterior, middle, and posterior. Let me come back to this diagram. Now, see what will be now. If I'm going to explain you deep cervical fascia, I'd say that it is divided into three layers. That is anterior, middle, and posterior. What it is nothing but this is the anterior, this is the middle, and this is the posterior. So now this deep cervical fascia is again divided into anterior layer, which is again divided into, which has investing fascia over the neck, the paratraumatic fascia, and the temporal fascia. Now this part, this brown structure present shown with the blue arrows is nothing but the anterior layer. Anterior layer's first part, that is the investing fascia that is present over the neck. Okay, now as you can see that it is running along this seventh spinous vertebra and then along the trapezius muscle and then along the sternomastoid muscle. Okay, now this is the cross section of the neck. Okay, it also has attachment which are above it and which are below it. So let us take a look over what are those. So this investing layer of deep cervical fascia, it basically is going to encircle the neck. We started from the seventh cervical vertebra. It encloses the sternomastoid muscle and the trapezius muscle. Then anteriorly, okay, then anteriorly somewhere here, it is going to form the superior surface of the submandibular space. The superior border is also going to enclose the submandibular gland that is present above it. It is going to then come over the inferior border of mandible. Along with it, it goes back and forms the horizontal ramus of mandible. It ascends over the mandible. The fascia splits around the muscles of mastication, forming the masticatory space. Covering the masseter muscle anteriorly, it splits around the parotid gland to form parotomasseteric fascia. Then it comes back. Okay, after parotid gland, it comes back to the middle pterygoid muscle. Now from there, it comes along the base of the skull at sphenoid bone and pterygoid plate. Superiorly, it reaches the zygomatic arch and the temporal bone to form the temporal fascia. Now, what is this temporal fat? Now, the temporal fat is nothing but it lies approximately 2 centimeter above the zygomatic arch. Okay, there the temporal fascia that is present, is going to divide into two layers, between which the temporal fat is going to be present. Similarly, anteriorly, the fascia splits at about 2 cm above the manubrium of the sternum to form suprasternal space of bones, which contains only areolar connective tissue. Making the concept again clear, what happens is the fascia, it runs, this deep cervical fascia, it runs from the spinous process of the seventh cervical vertebra along the trapezius muscle, coming along the sternomastoid muscle, along the submandibular gland present, then above it you have the inferior border of mandible, then from the border of mandible coming back to the ramus of the mandible. From the ramus of the mandible, it is going to enclose the parotid gland to enclose the parotomasseteric fascia. Then along the after the parotomasseteric fascia, it comes back to the middle pterygoid muscle. It approaches the base of the skull at sphenoid bone and pterygoid plate. It reaches the zygomatic arch, and above which it forms the temporal fascia. Now, 2 mm above the zygomatic arch, the fascia is going to divide, okay, along the temporalis muscle. That is nothing but going to contain temporal fat pad. Similarly, the muscle is going to get divided anteriorly, which contains only areolar connective tissue, and that is suprasternal space of bone, which is above the sternum. Talking about the deep cervical fascia, we have it deep cervical fascia's middle layer. We have sternohyoid, omohyoid division, and sternothyroid, thyrohyoid division. And then we have visceral structures, that is buccopharyngeal, pretracheal, and retropharyngeal. Now, first and second division, that is sternohyoid and omohyoid muscles, and sternothyroid and thyrohyoid division that is present. Now, why do we have specifically sternohyoid, omohyoid? Is because these two muscles lie superficially, while omohyoid and thyrohyoid usually lie deep to these sternohyoid and omohyoid division. These all muscles are called as strap muscles. While the third division, we first have here pretracheal layer. Now, talking about this pretracheal layer, it basically is going to enclose the trachea and the thyroid gland. Now, after this pretracheal layer, we are going to have next is buccopharyngeal fascia. This buccopharyngeal fascia present is between the pretracheal layer and the prevertebral layer present. It superiorly is bounded by the base of the skull, while, while inferiorly it comes along the mediastinum. Talking next about the retropharyngeal fascia. Retropharyngeal fascia is is between the two, that is the buccopharyngeal fascia, which lies behind the pretracheal fascia, and the alar fascia, that is this black line present is the alar fascia. The retropharyngeal fascia also arises superiorly at the base of the skull and inferiorly to the mediastinum. The space between these two is usually called as retropharyngeal space. Now this is the retropharyngeal space. As you can see, it lies between the buccopharyngeal and the alar fascia is the retropharyngeal fascia or retropharyngeal space. The posterior layer has usually two divisions. Okay, the alar division and the prevertebral division. Talking about the prevertebral division, it is nothing but it is the huge fascia which is going to surround all these prevertebral structures or around the vertebra. It basically surrounds the vertebrae and is attached to the postural muscle of the neck and the back. It is just anterior to the periosteum of this vertebra. While the alar fascia passes through the transverse process of the vertebrae on either side posterior to the retropharyngeal fascia. In vertical dimension, it exists from the base of the skull to the diaphragm. It fuses with the retropharyngeal fascia at the level of C6 and T4. This fusion is going to form bottom of the retropharyngeal space. Let me show you the diagram. What happens is that retropharyngeal and the alar fascia are going to fuse somewhere between C6 and T4, and that is the base of the retropharyngeal space. And rupture of this fascia over that portion is going to carry the infection from the retropharyngeal space into the mediastinum. Talking about the last part of the fascia is the carotid sheath. Now there is a controversy basically which layer exactly contributes to the carotid sheath. Some authors believe that alar fascia, that is posterior alar division of the posterior layer of the deep cervical fascia, whereas others say that this important structure is to all three layers of deep cervical fascia. But whatever they say about the origin of the carotid sheath, it is going to it is going to be behind the origin of the carotid artery in the superior mediastinum and passes through the pretracheal space in upward and posterior direction. Above the hyoid bone, it is just at the junction of the lateral pharyngeal and retropharyngeal spaces. Carotid sheath terminates at the jugular foramen superiorly and carotid canal, while internal jugular vein and carotid artery enters the where the internal jugular vein and carotid artery enter the base of the skull respectively. It is also going to enclose the vagus nerve, and cervical sympathetic uh, chain is going to come somewhere here at the posterior surface of the carotid sheath. So basically, fascia is nothing but the connective tissue that is overlying all the structures. We have two types of main fascia, that is superficial fascia and deep cervical fascia. The superficial fascia is going to come just beneath the subcutaneous layer, while the deep cervical fascia is going to have again three divisions, that is the anterior, middle and the posterior part. The anterior part is again going to get divided into the the sternohyoid and omohyoid muscle. Sorry, the anterior part is again going to come from the seventh cervical vertebra and then going to ensheath all the trapezius muscle and sternocleidomastoid muscle, while the middle layer is again going to have three divisions and the posterior division has two divisions, while carotid sheath in itself is another fascia. So this is about the fascia. The application of it, that is the spread of infection, will be seen in other video. Thank you.